Welcome to the Orientation podcast series from the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law Common Law section. My name is Professor Kyle Kirkup, and I'm the English Common Law Orientation Coordinator and co-host of this podcast. You will also hear on this podcast channel co-host and French Common Law Orientation Coordinator, Professor Anne Lévesque. We are both very excited to welcome you to the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law Common Law section. Each week, we will release episodes of professors at the Faculty of Law. Our goal is to introduce you to our law school community and to get you excited about the possibilities of your legal education. We will also have conversations on this podcast in both English and French. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube with closed captioning, or wherever you are listening to this episode right now. On today's episode, we talk about ways to thrive in law school. Professor Lynda Collins will take us through strategies students can use to make the most of their time at the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law. Using these approaches will help you flourish, both as a law student and as a future professional. But more importantly, they might even make you a happier and more joyful human being. Professor Lynda Collins is a leader in the law and public policy of toxic torts. After graduating as gold medalist from Osgoode Hall Law School, Professor Collins practiced in San Francisco and with EcoJustice Canada. Professor Collins then earned her LLM at UBC Law. She also appeared before the Standing Environment Committees at the House of Commons and the Senate. Most recently, Professor Collins served in the role of co-chair of Ontario's Toxics Reduction Scientific Expert Panel. As a member of the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law's Centre for Environmental Law and Global Sustainability, Professor Collins uses her expertise in the field of toxic torts and environmental human rights law to bring about positive change. Professor Collins, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So you've become interested in studying happiness and the law, and you even have a first-year seminar in winter 2021 called Happiness and the Law. And the course description says human happiness is arguably one of the underlying drivers of law and legal systems. Yet legal systems often overlook this central human need and desire, and lawyers. Can you unpack this for us a little?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the point of that course description is just to say that I think, in fact, our desire for our own happiness and the happiness of others is actually at the very foundation of law. That law is a social tool that we collectively developed in order to allow people to live good lives, to be free from violence and cruelty, to have the full scope to express ourselves and become who we want to be. When you think about human rights, they're really all about that, to be free from suffering, and then on the flip side, to be happy. And yet, this can get really lost in law school and in legal practice. And as you probably know, in fact, we've learned over the years that law students and lawyers have significantly higher than average mental health problems. So teaching that course and talking about this more widely is just my effort to try to reinsert that happiness driver into our legal lives.
And was there anything that, kind of motivated you to study this, or was it, just something you were noticing in the way that we as legal professionals approach questions? We're often taught, look for the reasoning of a decision, but maybe we don't attend to the emotions of a decision or the underlying meanings of a decision. Is there something motivating this question?
I mean, a couple of different things. On the one hand, my area of research is environmental law, and scholars in that field have been thinking about this for a while. So, for example, we've found that people that are happy buy less. They have less need to consume. And there's a lot of discussion in the sustainability world about creating more meaningful lives as an alternative to overconsumption. So that's kind of one stream. You may have heard of the very famous book, Small is Beautiful. There's a whole scholarship around that, an activist community around that. But really, I got interested in law school actually from my first year of teaching. I'm not sure where this came from, but sort of out of the blue, I decided as a brand new teacher that my pedagogical approach would be excellence without suffering. And then about 10 years later, when I served as first year director for 4 years, I began to research this more. And in particular, I stumbled across some interdisciplinary research coming out of the States on the pedagogy of hope in law schools, where a psych professor and a law professor got together and did an empirical study of how law professors can actually engender hope in their students. But what fascinated me about that and led to a ton more research, which led to that course that I'm teaching, is that they actually found that when students are happier, they perform better academically.
I feel like as soon as you say that, the first question that's going to emerge from any student that's listening to this podcast is, okay, like how do I do that? What are some strategies that I can keep in my back pocket as I make my entry into law and into the legal profession?
Yes. So the first thing that I want to do is make a plug for a few books that are very fun, very readable, that anybody could pick up in the summer as you prepare for law school. One of them is called The Happy Lawyer, and it's produced by Oxford University Press. And it gathers up all the data in a very digestible form. There's another one called How to Be Sort of Happy in Law School that I also think is really useful. It was written by a professor of sociology who did her JD at Stanford. And then actually my favorite is a non-legal book called The Happiness Advantage by Sean Achor. That's Achor. And you can find Sean's excellent TED Talk online as well. But basically, there's some fairly simple building blocks that are probably going to seem really obvious, and for that reason, they are often neglected. Law students in particular, because you're very smart, tend to think that if something is extremely simple, that it can't possibly be valuable. But in fact, the data shows that some of the most significant drivers of happiness are the most obvious. For example, sleep. Law students habitually believe that it's in their best interest to sacrifice sleep. They think that by doing that, they're going to actually increase GPA. The academic research shows the opposite. In fact, we're all much smarter when we sleep. But also, sleep deprivation is a significant driver of anxiety and depression. So if you're at that stage, at 10 o'clock at night, and you're deciding whether to finish that reading for your 8:30 class or go to bed, actually the research would suggest you might be better off to just go to bed. Not only will you be happier, less likely to have anxiety and depression, but you'll retain more of what you have read, and your brain is more ready to learn for the next day. So sleep. Exercise. Again, so obvious, you've heard this message, for your whole lives, but mostly we think about exercise as being something that's important for our bodies. And again, law students tend to have this, very courageous, but in fact counterproductive belief that, well, I'll just sacrifice my body for these 3 years. I'll neglect my exercise routine, and then one day I'll get back into it. In fact, once again, first of all, the researchers have found exercise improves academic outcomes, but definitely it is crucial for mental health. So there's a whole bunch of studies showing that exercise, in fact, can be as effective as some of the most commonly used prescription psychiatric drugs for dealing with anxiety and depression. So exercise. Nutrition. Again, I'm going to start sounding like a broken record. We can really tend to neglect this. And, it's not just law students. I think any law professor can identify with what I'm saying too. But good nutrition can be so helpful for mental health. There was one study that took people who were eating no vegetables, so, unusual, but maybe not in the middle of exams. And they brought them up to 5 to 8 servings of vegetables a day, and the happiness increase was this equivalent to going from unemployment to employment, which is one of the most significant drivers they've found sort of in the general population. Employed people are much happier than unemployed people. So, these 3 basics, if you could commit to sleep, exercise, and good nutrition in law school, you're way ahead of the game. After that, one of the most important things that I heard over and over again as I watched films by positive psychologists, read the peer-reviewed studies, was social connection. I read a number of researchers that are very eminent in their fields who said, if they could know one thing about you to predict your happiness, it would be your degree of social connection. So, it's so counterintuitive for our students who are such high achievers and such hard workers, but actually to take that time and go to a movie with your best friend might be the most significant thing you can do for your success that week, because it's going to put you in a positive framework, which is going to make your brain work better.
Other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit was relationships during law school. I went to law school in a relationship, and I stayed in that relationship. And
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. But I hear sometimes, I hear from students who say, "Oh my goodness, it's so challenging to have time for, a partner or for family members or for my communities." I'm guessing you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. A big part of that is your own self-care, because it's well known and perfectly understandable that when we're anxious in particular, we become more self-centered, right? The survival brain is kicking in. And if you think about our evolution, if you're running from a saber-toothed tiger, this is not the time to think about world peace. It's quite important to be self-focused. And that's what happens when we're anxious. We tend to be more controlling, we tend to be more bossy, we tend to be more irritable. So all of the things that we've already talked about, think about your sleep, or you're playing your video game or playing your guitar as like a noble deed that you're doing for the people that you love, because as you cultivate your own equilibrium, relationships will be so much easier to maintain and to enjoy. And also, I think if you can remind yourself that those relationships are not inconsistent with your legal success, in fact, they're crucial to your legal success. And if you need any motivation on this, there's a great TED Talk on the longest running study of human happiness, which comes out of Harvard. The study, I think, is still ongoing, and it's been about 70 years. And that study, the author said, if I could boil it down to one primary driver of happiness, it's love, it's relationships. And I don't just mean romantic relationships, friendship and community and family and romantic relationships. So, and those are people graduating from Harvard who have many of the same drivers as many of you do. They were overachievers, and, maybe type A. But ultimately, what really mattered in their lives, like nobody gets to the end of their life and thinks, I wish I could have won one more case. People feel grateful for the difference they made in their children's lives, or that time they went to Europe with their best friend or whatever. And I'm not saying that your career won't be incredibly important to you. It will, but it'll be more important to you if it is consistent with your values. It'll be more important to you if it's something that you honestly enjoyed. And yeah, I just think law school is a great 3-year opportunity to develop those skills, Develop them now. Learn your breathing technique now, so that it's there when you're about to go into your first murder trial. I always tell my students, like, fear is a part of lawyering, and you're human. So it's learning how to be with that, to be kind to yourself, and to manage it, to breathe through it, so that your voice is a little bit more steady and you're thinking a little bit more clearly. And yeah, I just think it's to me, I think the emotional piece is as important as learning to write. It's one of the basic building blocks of lawyering.
Yeah, and you mentioned, self-kindness, and I also think of kindness to others in law school, right? I try to remind in my small group, be kind to yourself and be kind to the people around you. So do you have any thoughts on you're going into an environment where it's competitive and it's challenging and it feels high stakes, and there's all these really smart people around you, and you're trying to navigate those connections and relationships. What do you think that looks like in law school?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think this is an area where our students really excel. And personally, maybe I'm obviously biased, but I actually think the University of Ottawa is very special in that regard. When I chat with colleagues from other schools, I think we do stand out, in fact, for our highly collaborative atmosphere. I've been teaching for 15 years, and I only feel every year a greater and greater sense of admiration for my students, for the way that they do support each other, and the joy and the community that they really do find. In fact, I've had several students tell me they found more community in law school than they ever had in undergrad, if they went to a big school or in classes of 1,000. So I think our students are quite good at that. But if you find, which especially happens if we're going into anxiety or depression, if you find that you're self-isolating, it can be good to just remember, reaching out to a friend's like brushing my teeth. That's like basic self-care, and as we care for each other, obviously, we all feel better. Like it really is, and the research shows this, something that benefits everybody. It's a really lovely thing about human nature. That I read one study where, oxytocin, the feel-good hormone, they did a study where people observed others performing acts of kindness. And they found the person who performs the act of kindness, the recipient, and the observer all have increases in that feel-good hormone. So you're just doing a real favor to yourself and to everybody when you act with kindness. And of course, crucial to remember, law school is short. Your career is long. These are your future colleagues. You'd be shocked how many opportunities have come my way because people liked working with me. I'm not being self-deprecating. I had something to bring to the table intellectually, obviously. But, there's a lot of smart people in law. And when they have the option to work with somebody who's nice to them versus somebody who's difficult, who do they choose,
Yeah, and thinking people in my small group, Rachel Leck, our assistant dean, is now in the law school, and 14 years after we graduate, there she is. And we also remember the people who were more challenging in the law school environment. And we remember that we never want to work with them. So it's something that definitely
you could be interviewing with anybody in your small group. That's a realistic possibility. And, even if you're at the same level, firms are really interested in knowing the personality of candidates because, you live with these people. My mom said to me growing up, most of your waking hours at work, you need to be happy. And a lot of firms feel that way. So even if somebody is just at your level, if you have personal knowledge of that person, they're going to really rely on that. So yeah, for sure you start building your reputations. And obviously I'm not suggesting that you fake it, but I just think it's a good investment to be kind. And even when we're feeling grouchy, and there may be days where you say something unkind to somebody and it's just really worth circling back to apologize and to let them know where you were coming from.
Yeah, and it just sounds like, so important to be doing that kind of work of self-reflection and checking in with yourself regularly. I sometimes notice, come mid-November when there's a lot of assignments due and the snow is starting to fall, that maybe there's even some signs that I can spot of a bit of burnout. Do you have any advice for students if they start to notice themselves when they do that self-check? They're experiencing burnout. What should they do?
So the first thing I would do is look at my list. Whatever that list is, you've decided is the priority, because it's astounding how often we forget, myself included, even after doing all of this research. So often when I find I'm feeling raw and ragged, I'll realize, the past 3 days I didn't meditate. And I'm a daily meditator, but there's a kind of trance we get into. So the first thing I would do when you realize you're not feeling good is take a look at that list. Have you been doing your gratitude list? Are you exercising? How's your eating? How's your caffeine? And how's your sleep? And have you reached out to the people that you love? Because often when we notice we're in trouble, in fact, we've let go of the basics. Now, if you find you're in a situation where you can't do those basics, and I've been through that myself, you can't sleep or you're having trouble eating, that's when reach out for help. Reach out for counseling. You're so anxious that when you sit to meditate, you can't. Then this is where it's good that nobody lives on their own planet. You weren't sent to a law school of one student. You're in a community and we're here for you, But sometimes it's actually as simple as taking a night off. I've been surprised at how many times people have said to me, that one yoga session or that one movie or that one going out dancing, my whole week pivoted on that, or a good long hug with your dog or your significant other can really change things. And, sometimes you also need to have a little bit of a schedule, put your well-being into your schedule. I have my students, when they do their writer's note, we have our students, when they write their memo sometimes, evaluate how the writing process went. So what types of errors did you eliminate? What would you do differently? And I added a wellness question. How did you take care of yourself while you did this assignment, and what would you do differently? And sometimes, especially for those of you that are highly scheduled, put it on the schedule. Write down your meditation, get up in time to do it, write down a bedtime, when are you going to work out, etc. You can combine things. So maybe you're an awesome multitasker, go for a walk with your smart colleague, you're increasing friendship, you're getting exercise, you can talk about the test. I don't really understand this duty of care concept. What do you think? And you're doing all those three things at once. Like, there are creative solutions, which is not to say it's never going to be difficult. And when it is difficult, I just would invite you to not make that wrong. Nobody climbs Mount Everest because it's going to be easy. And it's the same with law school. If you can see it as part of the ride, it becomes a lot easier. You're not doing anything wrong if you're struggling. See if it can flip a little bit to become exhilarating. Exhilaration and excitement is on the other side of fear and anxiety typically, as any musician will tell you. And sometimes we're on one side, sometimes we're on the other. But sometimes just that shift in perspective can do it. But definitely reach out for whatever help you need. Some of us really thrive in structure. We have an Institute for Contemplative Studies at University of Ottawa. It runs a free mindfulness meditation every week in English and French. Maybe that's the commitment that you make to yourself. You're always going to be there. For some people, it's attending a place of worship on a regular basis. For some people, it's meeting with a counselor on a regular basis. Some groups of friends will say, like, look, Tuesday, lunch together, sacrosanct. We don't do anything else, except lunch together on Tuesday or whatever. And then some people don't need that structure. And you probably know, better than anybody what you need. But build it in, plan for it. Because for most of us, it won't just happen. I know a few people that if they just get up in the morning and do what comes naturally, their mental health is fantastic. I live with a person like that. I'm not that person. If I don't attend to my mental health, things are going to get ugly. So I've learned that it needs to be planned and integrated into my schedule and my list of priorities.
Yeah. And I suppose, a student that might be listening to this podcast is saying, oh, like that, I'll do that later, right? Like, first year is so busy. I've got a memo due in Professor Kirkup's class, and I've got an exam coming up in Professor Mathen's class. Maybe I'll do that in the future because there will be some moment down the road where I get to the land of milk and honey and I have more hours in the day to go to the gym and meditate and sleep and have groceries in my house. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I have lots of thoughts, just try to stop me. I actually find is that people are way more efficient when they're taking care of their well-being physically and mentally. And I think we all know this a little bit. Everybody has had the experience of reading the same sentence 100 times and not absorbing it, right? But what the research are finding that if you've slept enough, if you're maintaining a positive outlook, in fact, you're going to do these assignments much more quickly than you otherwise would. You can read that case maybe once or once plus a second skim and actually absorb it. And think about this. How many times have you been in a class where you have the opportunity to learn from a really brilliant person who's made their life's work to study this field? And, you're kind of absent. You're kind of checked out because you're so exhausted or you're distracted. And so then you have to go home and self-teach, essentially, or you have to go into office hours, and it's really a massive waste of time. So actually cultivating your instrument, which is your brain and your body, ultimately frees up a ton of time. The other really obvious one is that when our students allow stress to get really out of control and physical health to get out of control, typically there's some kind of breakdown, and maybe it's something as minor as just a bad cold or something as significant as, very serious episode of anxiety or whatever. But in those cases, in fact, you lose days or in fact longer. Now, if that happens to you, none of this is a disaster. The law school is so resourced to support you. We have, as you know, our own counselor now in the Faculty of Law, but there's also a whole wellness department in the university. There's obviously the gyms that are highly subsidized. And, there's a lot of resources, and we are set up to accommodate our students. We're a school that is prepared to teach humans, not robots. One of the happiest lawyers I know, in fact, took a year off to deal with his mental health in law school, came back stronger, and now is doing really well 8 years into private practice, and in fact comes in and lectures to my class. So please don't feel that you need to be perfect in anything, including your wellness practices. You could get up one morning and be like, I am a hot mess. That's fine. You just get back on the bike. There's a Zen saying, fall down 7 times, get up 8.
As a professor too, it's important to recognize that we also face those. There are days when I'm walking to school and thinking, oh my goodness, I have to teach this thing, but there's this other thing going on in my life. How do I get myself focused? How do I kind of focus my intentions for the day, which I guess kind of brings us towards this idea of meditation. So you mentioned that one of the tools that students might be able to use to find some level of balance is meditation. So for students who have never meditated before, what does that look like, do you think?
There's a really wide range of meditation techniques, and luckily in the past 15, 20 years, there's been a ton of study. And we know that these are effective in reducing anxiety, improving your cognition, so improving your clarity of mind. And happily, in fact, researchers have found that meditations of even as short as 5 minutes a day can be effective. The one that I do in my first year class is my first year torts class. We do this as a practice skill because I think it's so valuable as a student, but also as a young lawyer. Think about arguing your first motion or your first murder trial or the first time you present to the partners, right? So we might as well just do it right now. We'll do like 90 seconds of it instead of the 4 or 5 minutes I do in class. So we just start out by doing a breathing technique where you're going to inhale for 4 and exhale for 8. And most of us, to get to 8, are going to need to provide some resistance. So like a blowing, I don't know what that's going to do to the bike. And thereafter, we just go into a super simple mindfulness exercise of just noticing our senses. So we can do it right now, just a short version. So we're going to breathe into the count of 4 and out to 8. Breathing in and out. 5, 6, 7, 8. And in and out. And in and out. And in and out. And now just let your breathing return to normal. And see if you can become aware of the temperature of the air in the room. Now notice the feeling of your clothing on your skin. And feel your body in the chair. Notice the stability. Then pay attention to what you can hear. Is there a fan or an air conditioner in the background? Can you hear your own heartbeat? And now just notice if you're having any thoughts. And just let them be okay. Don't follow them, but don't fight them. And now just entertain the possibility that you're doing everything just right. You're going to be fine. Then we'll take one more deep breath. You can open your eyes.
I feel incredible. I feel like I now want to do that every day.
It helps. And you know what? Even the breath alone, I've now had a number of students say they've used it before a job interview during OCI. They've used it on the way to an exam. And I've used it on airplanes. That's my Achilles heel. I get really nervous on airplanes. And even in turbulence, where my mind is telling me I'm in a life or death situation, I've actually found some relief through that. So yeah, these are, now, I should say, of course, this is not to say this stuff replaces counseling or medical help or whatever you need. I always tell my students, this campus offers everything from meditation to medication. And it's all good. anything that helps you is good. So, I always tell my students, if you need help, please reach out. As law students, we're very lucky, and lawyers, because we not only have the university resources, but we have the member assistance program that is run by the Law Society of Ontario. It's fully funded, so it's free to you and it's entirely confidential. They have a 24-hour hotline, and they also do e-counseling and phone counseling. So, please reach out for all of those resources. But in fact, if you integrate these well-being practices into your life, first of all, they'll make anything else that you're doing more effective. If you're on medication, work with that medication.
Yeah. Why do you think that we haven't talked more about this in the legal profession? I was in law school between 2006 and 2009, and I remember not thinking about any of these things. And I'm sure that there were people that were doing that, and maybe I just wasn't paying attention. But what's shifted here?
Yeah, that is a great question. I honestly don't know how the profession got off on the wrong foot, so to speak. But I think what has shifted is really people courageously coming forward with their stories of mental health struggles. And we're so privileged in the law faculty to have Orlando De Silva as our wellness mentor in residence. He was one of the first high-profile lawyers to go public with his mental health struggles. And I think, having that happen and having that, repeated hundreds of times has really awoken the profession to these issues. But what's so exciting to me about positive psychology, the work of people like Sean Aker, is that it's really not just about acknowledging or treating or accommodating illness. It's really about cultivating wellness. And it's exciting to me to think that, in fact, cultivating our happiness is one of the most powerful things we can do to improve our performance. So Aker provides a really great example in his book, The Happiness Advantage, where they did a study on doctors on speed and accuracy of diagnoses. And one group of doctors was given candy before the test, which they weren't even allowed to eat because they didn't want blood sugar to be a confounding factor. But they were given candy. It made them happy. They did the test, and then a control group just does the test in normal conditions. The group that got the candy and was happy, in a good frame of mind, performed the diagnosis more quickly. That's interesting. But fascinatingly, they had 2 times fewer diagnostic errors. So what does that tell us? So what it tells us as law students, if you've rehearsed your PowerPoint presentation for, your upper year constitutional law class, you've done it 10 times, you know it. You have 5 minutes before your class. Do you spend the 5 minutes going over the presentation for the 101st time? I would argue the research suggests call your best friend, call your mom, book a movie ticket online, dance. One of my most brilliant, successful law school classmates danced before every exam. And you can do that in 5 minutes, because actually any little boost of those good feeling hormones is going to actually clarify your thinking, refine your memory, make you better able to interact with your audience when you speak. So to me, obviously the mental health piece is crucial, but I'm really excited about that positive psychology piece and how it can improve our law school and the profession.
So it sounds as though, if you were thinking through, okay, what should a student do the night before an exam? And I think sometimes students will say, I'm going to study all night. I'm going to have a million apps open on my browser. I'm going to just keep working. Maybe to shift the conversation a little bit towards sleep, what I'm hearing is your piece of advice would be call it and go enjoy yourself. Do something that brings you joy, and go to bed.
Some yoga and whatever. And, it's going to take some winding down for most of us. Again, you're not a laptop, so don't expect yourself to just be able to hit shut down and go to sleep. Take the time that you need. But yeah, in fact, one of the really interesting studies I found on sleep, because there's not much on sleep in professional schools, it's mostly undergraduate and younger, but they've done some studies in med school, and this was a pharmacy school study, and just one study, but they found that all other factors being equal, extra hours beyond 6 hours of sleep before the exam accounted for a full letter grade improvement. So in fact, we are smarter when we have slept. And students will sometimes say to me, well, maybe it's just that the smart ones are the ones that have the time to sleep. So that too has been investigated, where you just take the same person, you test their cognition, you deprive them of sleep and test them again. And we get less smart. For myself, I'm just almost useless when I haven't slept. I mean, I'm forgetting keys. I'm like, and as a parent, it's frankly not even very safe if I haven't slept. Like, so it's not just that the smart ones are the ones that have time to sleep. Actually, some of my smartest students, the ones that have, been most successful and happiest, when I surveyed them, the one thing that came up consistently was they all prioritized sleep in law school. So these were my students that were now, at Oxford doing their PhD. They were clerking at the Supreme Court of Canada. And they had a lot of different advice from my current students, but the unifying factor, they all emphasized that they prioritized their sleep.
And last question, what was your favorite part of law school? Was there a kind of a penny drop moment or an aha moment or, just something that you really enjoyed?
Yeah. I did a co-op term and I interned at what was then the Sierra Legal Defense Fund. It is now Eco Justice Canada. And my first day of work, Stuart Algie, who's a professor now at University of Ottawa, was the boss. And he said, I'm just on the phone with the White House. He really was. He was doing endangered species campaigning. He said, I can't talk to you right now. Read this book and I'll be with you in half an hour. And the book was a photography book called Wild by Law. And it was photographs of all the places that have been saved through environmental litigation. And I was really lucky that in that moment, I knew what my life's work would be. And my whole career has really unfolded from that one moment. So yeah, I always encourage students to get into internships, volunteer jobs, try stuff out, because that's how you learn what you want. Most of us don't know when we start law school. I thought I wanted to work in property law when I started law school. It's only by putting yourself in different environments that you find what fits.
Great. Well, I feel so much better having had this chat. I feel calm and I feel good. And I know that our students listening will feel good too. So thank you very much for joining us.
Very much looking forward to meeting all of you. Welcome.
You've been listening to an episode of the Orientation podcast series from the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law Common Law section. You can subscribe to the Orientation podcast series on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube with closed captioning, or wherever you are listening to this episode right now. If you are a first-year University of Ottawa Faculty of Law student, you can also find additional sources at the Orientation 2020 Brightspace page. Thank you for listening, and we can't wait to meet you soon. This episode has been produced by Tech Law Fellow June Gleed.